Alright, welcome to this session of management accounting. So in this session I'm going to be explaining limiting factor, just like we promised in the previous video, right? I'm going to be explaining limiting factor, okay? And this limiting factor is very examinable, okay? So for those in their finals 500 400, you just have to pay attention. Alright, so now limiting factor. When we say limiting factor, what exactly are we talking about? So limiting factors are the items that restricts or hinders the production or sales of item or services. So in the process of production, in the process of sales, in the process of rendering service, anything, any factor, right, that hinders the successful production, sales, or rendering of that service is called what? A limiting factor. Alright, so there are different examples of limiting factor. It can be limited demand, it can be limited skilled labor, it can be limited raw materials, it can be limited labor hours. So how do we mean by this? Let's take for example, if we want to produce about 1000, if we need about 1000 kg of raw materials to produce for a particular budget, right? And what we have available is what is 600, right? But we require 1000. So automatically raw material, which is 600, is already a constraint, is already a limiting factor to that production process. All right. Also, if we require 10 laborers, right, to complete a production process, and what we have available is 5 or 4, automatically that labor becomes a limiting factor or a constraint. Right, so there can be limiting factor, limited demand, there can be limited skilled labor, there can be limited raw materials, and there can be limited labor hours. Alright, so now when we see questions that have to do with limiting factor, how do we go about it? So I've been able to pen down a list of 5 steps for us to follow. Alright, so when you follow these 5 steps, it will be very easy for you to solve any problem that has to do with limiting factor. Okay, so the step to follow, steps to solving problem under limiting factor. Step 1, identify the limiting factor. Identify the constraint. You must first of all identify the constraint. If you don't identify the constraint, then how are you going to solve it? Alright, so you must first of all identify the constraint. Let's take for example, we want to manufacture, let's say in the production process we require raw material 100 kg. We require labor of 100 hours. All right, this is the budget. Let's say this is what was budgeted for the production of what we want, but right now what we have available, if what we have available is raw materials, we have raw materials 80 kg, right? And we have labor hours, we have 200 hours. All right, now comparing this budget to what is available, you would clearly see here that raw materials, what is available is 80 kg, right? However, what is required is what is 100 kg. So it therefore means that the constraint or the limiting factor here is what is raw material. So limiting factor is equal to raw materials. So the first thing to do is to identify the limiting factor. It is when you identify the limiting factor or the constraint, that is when you can further go ahead. The step 2 now says calculate the contribution per unit of each product. Calculate the contribution per unit. Now this contribution per unit is simply contribution is selling price per unit minus variable cost per unit. All right, that is contribution. All right, selling price per unit, our contribution is equal to selling price per unit minus variable cost per unit. That is contribution. So you are going to calculate the contribution per unit. If we have different products, let's say we have product A, product B, product C, you are going to calculate the contribution for each of these products, and it is contribution per unit, not total contribution. All right, that's one. The next step is to calculate the contribution per limiting factor. Per limiting factor. So we would also need to calculate the contribution per limiting factor. So if we have some limiting factor, there can be one limiting factor, there can be more than one limiting factor, we would also need to calculate the contribution per that limiting factor. Now, after we have calculated the contribution per limiting factors, it is through the contribution of the limiting factor that we are now going to use to rank. The step 4 is rank your contribution per limiting factor in what? In descending order. In descending order. Let's take, for example, after we must have calculated the contribution per limiting factor, and the contribution, let's say for product A, B, C, the contribution here is 2, the contribution here is 3, and the contribution here is 5. All right, so it therefore means that we are going to rank them in descending order. And what does descending order means? From what? From highest to lowest. After you have prepared the allocation table, you can now advise the company based on their product mix. Which product and which product should they mix together? At what price? At what units? Now, how would you get that? Based on the allocation that you have done. Right? Based on the allocation. So these are the simple steps of solving problems that involve what? Limiting factor. So we are going to take a few examples. We are going to solve example 1, example 2, and example 3. And after these 3 examples, we would be home and dry with what? Limiting factor. So we are going to be taking example 1. Alright, so illustration 1 is this. I'm going to read it now while you pay attention. My Choice Manufacturing Company produced the following products: trouser, jackets, and skirts. Given that the demand for the product are as follow: trouser 5,000 units, jacket 12,000 units, and skirt 8,000 units. Alright, the material usage include 2 kg per unit, 5 kg per unit, and 0.8 kg per unit. The labors needed include 5 hours, 4 hours, and 2 hours, full stop. The total available for materials is 40,000 kg, and the total available for labor is 100,000 hours. Right? So you are required to identify the limiting factor. You are required to identify the limiting factor. So now this is the first illustration. Now your understanding of the solution of this first question will go a very long way while we are solving the subsequent examples. So now the question says that My Choice Manufacturing, that they manufacture 3 products. And what are the 3 products? The 3 products are trouser, jacket, and skirts. Don't forget that I have given us the steps to solving problems under limiting factor. So even without them telling you, the first thing to do is to identify the what? The limiting factor. How do we identify the limiting factor? We identify the limiting factor by comparing the demand and the available resources. Comparing the budgeted and the available resources. So now we are going to bring down the product that they produce. They produce trouser, jackets, and what? And skirts. Alright, so these are the 3 products. Now the next thing to do is to bring the demand. What is the demand that was given in the question. They told us that in the question, the demand for trouser is 5,000 units, jacket is 12,000 units, and skirt is 8,000 units. So I'm going to write it here, 5,000, alright, 12,000, and what? 8,000. So these are the demand. Now, they further told us that there is what? There is the material usage include 2 kg per unit, alright, 5 kg per unit, and was 0.8 kg per unit for each of these three. So we are going to bring the materials required. Alright, so the number of materials per unit, we are going to bring it down. The first one is 2 kg per unit, 2 kg per unit. The next one is what? 5 kg per unit, and this is what? 0.8 kg per unit. Okay, so we are going to multiply the demand, which is the total units, by the material price per unit. That is 2 times 5 will give me 10,000. 12,000 times 5 kg will give me 60,000. Right? 8,000 times 0.8 give me what? 6,400. Alright? So after doing this, this is now the total. So I'm going to add this plus this plus this. This is 10 plus 60,000, that's 70,000, plus this, that's 76,400. Right? So this will give me 76,400 kg. Alright? So now, this is the total. Now, what is available? You now bring what is available, what we were given as what is available. Now, let's go back to the question. In the question, they told us that the total available for material is 40,000 kg. For material, remember we are calculating for material first. 40,000 kg. So I'm going to bring the 40,000 kg here. Right? So now that I've brought the 40,000 kg here, if I subtract, so 76,400 minus 40,000, that will give me 36,400 kg. It means there is a deficit or a shortfall of 36,400 kg. That is for material. So obviously, if this is the demand and this is what is available, there is a shortfall of 36,400 kg of material, meaning material is already a limiting factor, right? So the next one we are going to do the same thing for the what? For the labor hours. So I'm going to say, what is the demand for labor hours? Demand for labor hours. In the question, they told us that this is the demand, 5,000, the same number of demand, 12,000, and what? Skirt is 8,000. Okay? So the next thing is labor hours. Okay? In the question, they told us that there is 5 hours per demand. 5 hours, 5 labor hours. So I'm going to bring it here, 5 hours. Right? The next one, they told us that it is 4 hours. And this is 2 hours. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to multiply the labor hours alongside the demand, so as to give us the total labor hours that is required for this production. So 5 times 5 will give me 25,000. This 25,000 labor hours. 12 times 4 will give me 48. This 48,000 labor hours. And 2 times 8 will give me 16,000 labor hours. So I'm going to total this. This is total. Right? So if this is total labor hours, I'm going to write the total here. 25,000 plus 48,000, that will give us what? Plus 16,000. So the total will be 89,000 labor hours. 89,000 labor hours. Okay? So this is the total labor hours that is required for this production. But now, what is the available labor hours that we are given in the question? If you go back to the question, we were told that the total available for labor is 100,000 labor hours. So I'm going to write here available 100,000 labor hours. Alright, so it means there is an excess of what is available to what is demanded. And what is the excess? 11,000 labor hours. So looking at both computation, the computation for materials and computation for labor hours, obviously you would know that the limiting factor here is what? Is materials, right? The limiting factor is material. Why? Because what is available is less than what is required to complete the production. But for labor hours, what is available is even more than what is required. So to conclude this, I'm going to say, therefore, the limiting factor is materials. Okay? So the limiting factor is material. So that is what the first question is all about. The first question is to help us understand how to calculate the what? The limiting factor. Now we have been able to do this. We are going to move to example 2. In example 2, we are going to go further to calculate the limiting factor, the contribution per unit. We would now calculate the contribution per limiting factor. We will also calculate contribution. After calculating contribution per limiting factor, we are going to rank it. After we rank it, right, we can now allocate before we can now decide the best product mix to advise the company for. All right, so welcome back to this session. Before I continue, if you are here to subscribe to this channel, kindly turn on your subscription and make sure you comment, like and share so that you don't miss out on subsequent videos. All right, I'm going to try as much as I can to exhaust all the topics so as to be able to prepare you well for your upcoming exams. All right, so illustration 2 on limiting factor. Henry Products Limited is considering the production of 3 products, namely red pea, green pea and blue pea. Red pea, green pea and blue pea. The financial information in respect of this product is as follows. They gave us red pea, they gave us green pea, they gave us blue pea. They gave us the selling price 60, 80, 100. Labor, which is 2 naira per hour, 30, 20, 60. Material, which is 1 naira per kg, 15, 30, 20. And they gave us contribution per unit to be 15, 30, 20. They gave us labor hours per unit to be 15, 10, 30. They gave us maximum demand per annum 1,800, 600. They now said, what product mix will maximize the annual contribution if labor is restricted to 20,000 hours per annum? What product mix will maximize the annual contribution if labor is restricted to what? 20,000 hours per annum. All right, the solution to this is simple. So right now, to solve this particular question, we are going to follow the steps that I gave to us. And to solve any question under limiting factor, the number one step to do is to identify the constraint, or to identify the limiting factor. So identify the limiting factor. So the limiting factor, you remember we have red P, green P, and blue P. So we are going to bring them down. We have red P. Let's call this red P, green P, and blue P. So here we can have annual demand, hours per unit, then we have the total. Alright, so now from the question we want to extract the information we have been given in the question. We have the annual demand, we have the hours per unit, and we'll multiply it to get the total. So what is the annual demand that we're given in the question? It told us in the question that red P has 1,000, green P has 800, while blue P has what? 600. Alright, now we are also going to bring the labor hours, the hours per unit. They told us in the same question that it is 15, 10, and 30. So I'm going to bring it here: 15, 10, 30. So the next thing is to multiply. So if I multiply, this will give me 15,000, this will give me 8,000, and this will give me what? 18,000. This is 15,000. This is 8,000, and this is what? 18,000. So I'm now going to write the total. What is the total? 15 plus 8, that will give us 23. 23 plus 18, that's 3 plus 8, that's 11. 2 plus 1, so that's 41,000. 41,000. So we have a total of 41,000. So this is what is required. This is what is required for this production. All right, this is what is required based on the budget. Now let's check what is available that they gave us in the question. They told us in the question that what production mix will maximize the annual contribution if labor is restricted to what? 20,000. So this is the total labor hours, but now they have restricted available. Available is what? 20,000. So if this is the required and this is the available, it means there is a shortfall. Shortfall of how many? 21,000. Because what is required is more than what is available. So there is a what? Shortfall or deficit. So once there is a deficit or shortfall of a particular it means that is the limiting factor. Alright, so this is the limiting factor. It means already there is a limiting factor. That is, we are limited to what? We are limited to 20,000 units. So whatever we are allocating, whatever production we are going to embark upon, we are going to be limited by 20,000 labor. Alright, so now after you have done this, this is step 1. The step 2 is to calculate the what? The contribution per hour. Is to calculate the what? The contribution per hour. How do we calculate contribution per hour? Contribution, I have told you earlier that contribution is selling price minus variable cost. But in this situation, alright, contribution per unit we have been given. They gave us in the question that contribution per unit is 15, 30, and 20 for the 3 products. Since we have been given contribution for the three products, we have been given the contribution. So now to calculate the contribution back again, we are going to divide it. We are going to divide it by the hours per unit. So the next thing is calculation of contribution. Per unit. So first, I have explained this and I want to still talk about it again. Contribution itself is selling price minus variable cost, right? Selling price minus variable cost. Then the per unit is selling price per unit minus variable cost per unit. But we have been given the contribution per unit. So to calculate the contribution per hour in this case, we are going to use the contribution per unit to divide the hours per unit. So I'm going to bring the contribution per unit. Alright, for the three products, we have contribution per unit, we have red P, we have green P, and we have blue P. Alright, so the contribution per unit, I need to rewrite this so that it will be contribution per unit. This we have been given in the question. They told us that it is 15, 30, and what? And 20 naira. So this is in naira, don't forget. Alright, so now we are now going to bring the hours per unit that we have also been given in the question. They told us that in the question that hours per unit for red P is 15, for green P is 10 hours, and for blue P is 30 hours. So I'm going to say 15, 10, 30 is hours per unit. 15, 10, 30. So what is the next thing? I need to divide all through. Alright, we are going to divide all through. That is, this divided by this will give me 1, this divided by this will give me 3, and this 20 divided by 30 will give me 0.67. 0.67. So this is the contribution per unit. This is now the contribution per unit. After we must have calculated this contribution per unit, the next thing to do is to rank these items. The contribution that we have calculated now, we are now going to rank it, that is in descending order, right? Descending is from up to down, right? We are going to rank it in descending order. So in this case, if I am ranking, step 3 is to rank. Ranking. If I am ranking, it means green P would be allocated first, followed by red P will be allocated second, while the blue P will be allocated what? Third. So it therefore means that on our allocation table, which is the next solution, we are going to first of all allocate green P. What is required for green P? We are first of all going to allocate that. When we finish, we'll now go to red P. Then when we finish with red P, we'll now go to blue P based on the available 20,000 hours. Alright? So that is for that. So the next line of action is to go to our what? Our allocation table. Allocation table. So solution 4. Allocation table. Alright? So in our allocation table, what do? We are first going to bring the limiting factor. So we are going to do this way. Let's call this available limiting factor. By the side, we can say product mix. Okay? Available limiting factor, product mix. Are we together? So now, we'll first bring the available limiting factor. What's the total? In the question, they told us that we are limited to how many? 20,000. So I'm going to bring the 20,000 here. Alright? Now, if we are limited to 20,000, it means we would now allocate based on the rank that we have what? We have created. So in the ranking, we said that we are going to allocate to green P first. So I'm going to say green P. How many does green P require? Now in the total, green P requires 8,000 for this production. So I'm going to share 8,000 to green P first of all, right? Or I'm going to use 8,000 of green P as a material. Okay, so if I subtract it, it will remain 12,000. So this is the balance. That is, I have taken 8,000 of green P. Okay, so it's going to remain 12,000, available 12,000 now. But now, how did we arrive at this? In the bracket, how did we arrive at this? How many units of green P? How many units are we mixing? So we are mixing 8,000 divided by what is by 10 hours per unit, divided by 10. So that was how, so we are using 800 units. 800 units of green P. So we are mixing 800 units of green P. Let's continue. Remember, we still have 12,000 here. Now let's continue. So the next allocation is number 2 on the ranking is what? Is red P. So I'm going to bring red P here. So how many does red P require? Red P requires 15,000. Red P requires 15,000, right? But what is available? We have 12,000. So we are only going to allocate 12,000 to red P. Right? Nil. 12,000 minus 12,000, nil. So how are we now going to arrive at what is the unit that we are mixing? This 12,000 divided by the units of hours, the hours per unit, which is 15 hours per unit, divided by what? 15. So if we divide it, that will give us 800 units as well. Okay, so that is the allocation table. Now we are done with the allocation table. Can you see that we have finished allocating the available or the scarce or the limited factor, which is 20,000. We have allocated it based on our ranking. Now, what do we now advise the company? So what is now the product mix? The product mix is the annual product mix. The annual product mix is green P 800 units, right? Red P 800 units. So this is the best mix for this production. This is the best mix for this production based on the limited resources that is available. All right, based on the limited resources that is available. Now this topic is also a very examinable topic for those that are writing performance management with ICANN. All right, so you should know that this topic is very examinable. So this is example 2. We are still going to solve example 3, but if you are still here to subscribe, kindly subscribe, drop your comment and share for your friends to also benefit from it. Illustration 3.